can look at the Bible as being outside of time, outside of time. In other words, when he's saying, what he hath commanded in the days of old, it's like he is saying, now today, in the year 2010, I am telling you this. This was commanded in the days of old, already back 2,600 years ago. I already said these things were going to happen. And so we're reading it like we're reading it today. He hath thrown down and hath not pitied. He had caused thine enemy to rejoice over thee. Now remember, the context of Revelation, or of Lamentation rather, is that God is, it's a funeral dirge as to what happened to his precious nation, the nation of Israel. We already mentioned that, as well as what happened to that wonderful organism, the church age, that had existed for 1955 years. What happened that it today is in the trouble that it is? And here he's telling us what happened. He has set up, and that he had caused this thing to happen. He had caused thine enemy to rejoice over thee, over the churches, over the nation of Israel. Satan rules. Satan rules. He rules in the whole world today. He has been let loose, we know from the New Testament, and he has been assigned the task to rule in the churches as well as as the whole world is being prepared for judgment. This is why today we stand appalled at the increase in sin everywhere. The sin in the churches, the sin in the world, it's just an appalling situation because Satan is ruling and God has withdrawn his hand of restraint because the whole world and the churches are getting prepared for Judgment Day. And you see, again, remember when we looked at the last study or two at the Apostle Paul, we say these things, and all kinds of honest, well-meaning people hear these things and they say, I don't see it in the Bible. I don't see it at all. I don't agree with you at all. And we must never, never be frustrated by that. We must never, never be unhappy by that kind of a retort, because unless God opens our eyes, we can't see it. We cannot see it. It's impossible. Just like, again, I was so comforted when we took a look at the Apostle Paul. He had an intellectual capacity that was very, very great. He was a Pharisee of the Pharisees, we could say, trained at the feet of Gamaliel. He was an absolutely honest man, and yet he was killing the Christians that were following the Lord Jesus. Was he doing it out of meanness? Because he was just that kind of a nasty character? No. He was doing it because he wanted to serve God faithfully. He was utterly convinced he had the truth. And honestly, as he studied the Bible that he had in his days, he was convinced this is truth. And then remember, let me just run this again past us because it is so helpful, that when he was arrested on the way to Damascus, and he was there in Damascus praying, and Ananias the preacher came to deal with him, scales fell off his eyes, and suddenly he found truth. It wasn't because he did more studying. It wasn't because he had become more wise in himself. It was because God opened his eyes. And then the astounding thing was when we looked a little more at him, in no time flat, he was teaching all about the Lord Jesus Christ from what his knowledge of the Bible was. How could he do that? Because as a Pharisee, I can see it perfectly. As a Pharisee, and he was convinced that Jesus was an impostor, that he was absolutely of Satan, and therefore the people ought to be killed. he was searching all these verses in the Old Testament, because that's all he had. They didn't have the New Testament yet. They just had the Old Testament. He was searching those verses and pondering them and praying for wisdom. And as he looked at them, all he could see is, these don't tell me anything at all about this Jesus. He is an imposter, and these people have got to be killed. But now suddenly, when God took the scales off of his eyes, these very verses, he didn't have to restudy the whole Bible. He knew what these verses that he had struggled with and struggled with and struggled with. He was an honest man. I'm convinced he had to be trying to do his homework very honestly. And suddenly he saw, oh, I had it all wrong. They have to do with the Lord Jesus. And so he could put them in their proper perspective just like that, because God had opened his eyes. And therefore, if we have come to truth, it is something that we absolutely can't take any credit for ourselves. Like, I'm brighter than somebody, or I'm more this, or I'm more that. The only reason if we do come to truth is because God has opened our eyes. And if God hasn't opened our eyes, I don't care how hard we study the Bible or how diligently we study the Bible, we're not going to understand. And that's why we can talk to people, friends. I talk to my children, I talk to my friends, and what I say to me is as clear as day, right out of the Bible. And they listen, and they listen, and then they smile if they're nice to me, and it ends up, and I can see they haven't understood it at all. Are they being stubborn? Are they being nasty? Are they so wrapped up in sin? No, 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 no. God hasn't opened their eyes. God hasn't opened their eyes. That's God's business, whose eyes he's opened. And until he opens their eyes, they won't see. They won't see. And so I say this, I want to say this again and again, because sometimes we who have our eyes open a little bit, we get frustrated because we try to share it, and to us it's so plain, and it isn't to them. And we must never be frustrated. We should be praying, 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 praying. Oh, Lord, could it be that you might open this one's eyes or that one's eyes, and begging and crying to him. Well, let's go on.